Okay, well, I'm assuming that that's recording. Oh, yes, it says recording up in the corner. Okay, great. Yeah, up there. Exactly. Happy days. All right, guys. So, look, we'll start off. If people join, I'll just keep an eye on the, as Luke coming in there. There'll probably be a few stragglers, but I want to start on time. I have another student later on in the day, so we'll get into it. All right. So, like I said in the message there before, I'm just going to obviously, use this as the discussion element of the course, which is what you understand it to be. But we'll talk about some specific topic or other each week as well, so that it's just a little bit more specific for you. And also, obviously, we'll debrief on the work that we have done during the week. Again, just letting a couple of people in. Yeah. So first of all, I guess let's just debrief. And obviously, if at any stage, stop me and ask questions. That's all good too. Okay. So what we did during the week then, the Wednesday guys, thank you very much, Wednesday guys. I'm very impressed with your punctuality and your work that you're doing. It's really great. So we looked at extended imagery and endowment this week. Okay. So that was the first time that was introduced to the Wednesday workshop guys. The Friday studio guys will know all about that for the most part. And I'll just briefly debrief on that and what those two things mean now. And then we'll keep going from there. So the Friday guys, we had two kind of very different sessions for the Friday guys. The Friday studio first group was not ready yet to put anything up on the floor, so we did some work on beats and on through line of action. And then the second group actually put up quite a bit of stuff. We've got a couple of scenes up in a monologue, which was great. The beginning few beats of two scenes in a monologue from Luke Heaps and also from Mirren and Owen with a short monologue as well, which was really interesting. So we'll talk about those a little bit too as we go along, and refer, our discussion to those things. So before we do that, though, any questions from anybody about this week's work? Great. Okay. Well, we'll just truck on then. So I guess the first thing is just to go back to the Wednesday guys and just debrief on what those two things mean, the extended imagery. Okay, so the extended imagery, as we talked about, is the imagery that extends beyond the scene or the monologue itself. And it's the best way to kind of imagine it is that, you're looking at a stage and you're seeing a scene that's set perhaps in a kitchen or an office or something like that. But what the two actors are talking about, or what the two characters are talking about, is what's happening outside of that. Of those four walls, right? So I use the Crucible as the example there, where you've got John and Elizabeth Proctor, talking about how beautiful it is out in the fields. So the audience's mind gets taken to how beautiful it is out in the fields, and then Elizabeth turns that around and starts talking about all the dark imagery connected with the Salem witch trials and what's going to go on there, with all of the dungeons and the gallows and everything else that's happening there. And so Arthur Miller's clashing the images together as much as he's clashing the objectives together. And our job, partly as actors, is to be aware that the audience needs to be taken on that journey. Okay, so we know that the audience then is being drawn along a whole other journey other than what they're actually seeing right in front of them on the stage itself. Yeah. So that's the name of it. It's extended imagery. It's the imagery that extends beyond the stage, beyond what we see on the stage. It is relevant in film. It happens in film as well, of course. It's just not quite as important in that sense, because often in film, we can just go and film that imagery, and that's delivered to the audience in that sense. All right. So how, again, is it useful for us in terms of this idea of feelings that seem real, as Stanislavski put it, or sensations? Same as with the objectives and the core problem, the given circumstances. We're asking ourselves what is inspiring us when we play these scenes out. What's provoking sensations in us. Imagery obviously can be one of those things. Okay. So even for those guys who have done this a long while ago, you know, in the applied art of acting and worked on all this, don't forget it. You know, it's something that you can, you know, let go by, and you can kind of forget about that. That, you know, the audience is actually going on a whole other journey. And if you sort of neglect to flesh out what those images are in your rehearsals and in your preparation, you can kind of paper over them, and the audience misses those nuances as well. And of course, it dictates pace as well, because the pace that the imagery goes from, oh, Jenny fell out. Here we go. The pace that the imagery goes from the character, one character, to the other character, is the same pace that that image goes from the to the audience. Okay. Yeah, and of course, imagery can be very powerful, very strong. You know, as you well know. I mean, if it, on a very obvious level, if you see something really graphic, like violent or pornographic or something like that, you know, it can really trigger an emotional response or a physical response from you. You know, that's the obvious extreme example, of course, but you know, just the it's not just the imagery of the eyes as well. It's sounds. You know, the sounds of children playing, the sound of birds in the morning, the sound of the sea on the shore. You know, these can change us. They can give us a sense of something, calm or joy or whatever, you know, that whatever that sensation is, depending on the image, right? Okay, so these things are very powerful, and you know, what moves us more than likely will probably move the audience, as long as we relay that to the audience, and we care about those images, and we, you know, bring them across to the audience. We can take them on a very visceral journey of sensations through the imagery. So it stops sort of, again, it stops sort of being all about me being moved by the imagery. It's kind of like a sharing with the audience that this is what moves us together. You know, we're all being moved, and you can't dictate that. Obviously, you can't manipulate how the audience is going to feel, but you can connect with them on that level and bring us all on that kind of communal journey of a piece of theatre, or film for that matter. Yeah. Is that all clear on extended imagery?
Yeah, there's a lot of psychology in acting. You know, when you talk about triggers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I did a year in counselling and psychotherapy. So it's just, I know some of the words you use, like triggers and stuff like that, it just brings it back to me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of, that's right, Nicola, and there's quite a kind of intricate theory as well, obviously, behind the way that a piece of theatre, or any piece of art for that matter, moves an audience or changes an audience, and in that sense moves a society or even changes a society, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably that all that theory is more something that you would study in, say, a drama course, like a drama degree, you know, at university, as opposed to a straight acting course. But of course, it all bleeds into each other. Yeah, definitely, it still bleeds into our acting.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings me to another point, which I'll just broach briefly, right? Which is kind of this sense that some actors sort of feel that if they concentrate on anything other than exactly what's happening in that scene, you know, that communication between one actor and another actor, that they'll somehow lose the reality of that exchange between the two characters. That kind of comes from the Meisner tradition, where it's all about putting all of your attention on the other actor and really shutting out everything else in order to focus your attention, concentrate your attention on the other character, yeah, I suppose, and make that scene as realistic or hyper naturalistic as possible. But what sort of more recent, I was going to say more recent, but in fact it goes back into the English theatre as well, that acting isn't just an exchange between two characters. It goes right back to the ancient Greeks and to the tribal fire. It's all about the whole communication that goes on between the actors and the audience. So the audience is very much a part of that. And, you know, I think it's proven, or I think it can be said that anyway, that it's largely been accepted that we can perform with the audience in mind you know, without breaking the reality of what we're doing. In fact, the fact that it's being shared with somebody actually often enhances the sensations. It makes them richer and somehow more broad and poignant and profound, if I can use that word. Yeah. Okay, interesting. Anything else on the extended imagery? Yeah. So just on a simple level, you know, if you have a monologue and you're talking about, I mean, Gonzo sent me one there, really lovely monologue that he's going to work on about, it's actually a mother talking about her son, but it doesn't matter gender-wise, it will still work if we just, you know, use it anyway. But yeah, that image of that son, if Gonzo has a developed image of that son in his mind's eye when he delivers that monologue, then we will see that son as well. We may not see the same male entity that Gonzo has developed in his imagination, but we will have something. And then all of the kind of stuff that happened to that son will, between that son and that father or mother, will work, because we'll be brought into a kind of a sharing of the themes and everything that are in that monologue. Yeah.
I can probably also say with extended imagery, like it might not necessarily be used to bring in the location or visual setting as to what you're talking about, but extended imagery also brings in the look as to how you feel, the look as to what you're feeling as well. You know, it's practically, you know, creating a mental image as to what the character is going through as well. That's a very useful, you know, outcome when you use it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly that. It can shift your mood one way or the other, without it being generalized. It's a specific shift in mood. Yeah. Great. Okay, so endowment then. We'll just go on to that again. Just please stop me and go back. If you think of something about extended imagery, let's just go back and discuss. Endowment, again, is that idea of putting all of your attention on the other person in the scene, and in that sense, endowing them with the qualities of being the other character. Okay, it's a kind of a choice that you make. And I talked to the Wednesday workshop guys about the actual kind of neurological thing that's happening to you when you do that. You're actually changing your concept of the other person in front of you, because our brain's made up of these concept neurons, and you know, the concept of Andy to me changes when Andy is my brother or father or lover or whatever he's meant to be in the scene, and that changes. And it's quite a specific change. It's not just a sort of a generalized sense. It is perhaps at first, because I did the exercise with you guys where you put you know, you endow the person opposite you with the qualities of being, say, your brother or sister. It starts as a general idea, but it always starts as something up here and becomes a sensation of some sort. And then when the rest of the given circumstances are filled in, that becomes much more specific, until you have a very specific sensation again of your brother or sister opposite you. And again, it's a really powerful tool to use, because you have a permission, you know, between yourself and the other actor in the scene, because you're both doing it. You know, you're both allowing yourself to be that person in the scene. It's safer. It's a safe place. You know, we're both playing the game at that level. And you can feel brave enough to, you know, if it's a romantic scene, that you're not going to step on anybody's toes. If it's a scene with violence or aggression, you're not going to actually hurt anybody's feelings, that we have this agreement between us. And we play the game very fully, knowing that at the end of the scene, that's it. The curtain comes down and the play is over, kind of thing. Very handy tool for self-taping and screen tests. I am going to do one of these talks fairly soon, I think, about self-taping and screen tests. But endowment's a very important tool for that. I feel myself anyway, that, you know, if I have, you know, one of my sons, you know, reading the other part, I need to endow what is over there with the qualities of being the other character in the scene to some extent. Otherwise that'll get in the way and distract me. Yeah.
David, can you hear me?
I can.
Tom here.
Tom,
Yeah. Sorry. Can you just endowment, can you sort of give us the log line of that again? Paying all your attention to the other actor in order to,
Yeah. Okay.
what? You know, I sort of was struggling there with my pen. Couldn't keep up with you.
No, you're fine. Yeah.
Just a sort of a log line that I can sort of refer back to.
Sure. Okay. So what you're doing is endowing the other person with the qualities of being the character in the play or the scene.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
If you haven't done that work with me before, we can do a quick exercise on that, you know, together in the group next Friday. It will take very little time, and you'll feel that for yourself.
Cool.
There is a real shift in the sensation in you when you make the imaginative decision that the person opposite you is, you know, the other character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and once again, like, that's the compass, isn't it? I mean, when we feel a shift in ourselves, then we know that we're kind of in the right place. I was working with an actress this morning in Cork, just online, just one-to-one, and she's very, very good. She's become very good over the time that we've been working together. And I just noticed, I actually had the conversation with her, I've noticed that when I first started running scenes with her by Zoom, you know, I was very much, my teacher's hat on was like, if I could put it into percentages, my teacher's hat was 99%, because I'm reading her the part, obviously, and watching how she's getting on as we go. And I've noticed just today, you know, that she is causing me to take my teacher's hat off. You know what I mean? She's actually knocking it off. She's insisting in the scene that I am that other character. She's drawing me in, and my acting's becoming more, I'm becoming more an actor in that process than a teacher, because her endowment of me is so strong that it's demanding that I have to be that person for her, and I feel myself endowing her right back again. Yeah. And it becomes an exchange, which is very powerful. Okay, any other questions on that, on those two? Okay. Yeah, okay. So just going to the Friday studio, guys, and what was done. Obviously, we looked at the beats and the through line of action again, and we kind of had a bit of a play with a little exercise where we, in the first group, where we wrote down the beats and the through line of action of 3 different scenes, and then swapped actors around so that they invented their own narrative on each of those through lines of action, which was really quite fun. And again, it's like it's an old sort of exercise that you can do with any kind of level. It's an improvisation based on a structure, obviously, but it really does show that, you know, you can invent a through line of action. Yeah, you can invent a narrative on any through line of action. And that's what the Commedia dell'arte used to do. You know, when they went from town to town performing in the town square, they would put their through line of action up on a big piece of butcher's paper and go, right, let's improvise. And it might not be anything like what it's sort of was first envisaged as it was going to be, but it turns out that it becomes a narrative anyway. So if we have time, I might do that with the Wednesday guys as well, just for a bit of crack. And it's good exercise as well. You know, it's sort of good exercise to follow a through line of action, to come up with your series of beats. And the beats are really important. You know, I mean, it's one of those ones where some people find it kind of a bit too studious and sort of let it go, you know, as you kind of get more experienced. But if you have been acting for a while and then you sort of go back and break it up into beats, you realize that you do have a heightened understanding of the narrative of the piece, you know, and that gives you a confidence, even a sort of subconscious confidence. Like, I know exactly what the game is here. I know exactly what I'm playing. And that gives you, you know, that doesn't mean that what's going to happen is it's going to cause you to preempt because you know what's coming next. It actually does the opposite. It gives you the confidence to forget what's coming next, because you know it so well. You know you're just going to land in the next beat as you go. So it kind of has the inverse effect of causing you to preempt. It's the opposite of it, really. Great. Okay. Any other questions on that stuff?
No, I just think, sorry, just to speak on the beats there, because it can be quite off-putting getting so specific, like structuring everything out and the amount of work you have to put into each beat, because you just want to play with it and let it happen. But I do think doing all the work first allows you to play and let it happen. And I think the more work you put into them beats and the more studious and structured and you get down to the nitty gritty, that you just know it, like you're saying the Hail Mary, you know, by the time it's showtime. I think that's really where the benefits of doing all that work is. You know it like the back of your hand, and then you can play with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. But yeah, you've got the dynamic of the structure to play within. You know what the parameters are as well.
It's like being in a band. You know, you rehearse to get really tight. Then you get a gig and you know it so well you're loose.
Yeah.
You know, it's like what Luke's just saying there. You know.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think it's the same with anything, isn't it? I mean, you know, if you know exactly what you're talking about when you're a teacher, it helps.
I think the confusion comes from when you're, particularly me, when I was learning all this stuff, you kind of think, oh, do I really have to learn it? But the further you get through it and the longer you do it for, you just know you have to do that. It's a necessity. You have to do that work. So just if anybody's only starting or learning this stuff for the first time, just to hear it from someone else, you have to do that work, you know, to get comfortable with it.
Yeah,
it's not something you can skip.
Cool. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and I think it can be fun as well, you know. And the other thing to realize, of course, is that, you know, just because you're doing all that work, it doesn't mean that you're in some way an amateur. I mean, the best actors in the world do exactly what we're doing here. You know, the ones at the very top, the ones that are winning Academy Awards. The amount of work that goes in, you know, the amount of work that Joaquin Phoenix put into Joker is enormous. You know, to have a complete understanding of where he is in the structure of that that arc that character goes through is hugely intricate. If you think he's doing it by some kind of fluke or some kind of chance, then, you know, you're wrong. It's hard work.
Heath Ledger?
Both. Yeah. Yeah, Heath as well. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you know, it's one of those kind of ironies, isn't it? You know, all we see is what seems to look really easy and fun. And then behind the scenes, there's, you know, 6 months of, maybe 9 months of really, really hard work that's gone into it. But, you know, when I say hard work as well, I mean, hey, we're acting. What kind of, you know, it's not a chore, but it is work. Yeah.
Joaquin Phoenix actually.
David, just what you were saying there. Sorry. Just what you were saying there about like what we see versus the work that goes into it. Is that where you break it up from internal life, external life in terms of extended imagery? No, that's a different thing. No, I'll go on to that. Okay.
I'll actually go on to that. But no, you're thinking of a different thing altogether. No.
Yeah. No.
Oh, actually, I see how you've connected it up, Luke. I see how you've connected it up. I'll go back to that in a second. Yeah. So Luke Heaps, you were going to ask something there. You spoke at the same time there.
Sorry, I was just going to mention, just talking about Joaquin Phoenix. He actually had to, when he started filming, in an interview I heard, the choices he made were totally the wrong ones. He put 3 months of work into it, and when they got to filming with the director, they just went, no, we're not in the right place, and he had to actually go through all the work again. Mm-hmm. So it just goes to show, like, even at the top level, you can just you can get it wrong, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say the key is that probably what Joaquin did was he tried to make the character in one way, but the director wants a different way of the character. But it's always good to invent, to experiment, to surprise hopefully the director, a way that you can do the character. That's what will make your character unique, in the context of the film. Like what Heath Ledger done with Joker, for example. It painted the Joker in a whole new light. Or darkness, even.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Sometimes what happens though with that Joseph is it's not so much that the director wants something other than what the actor wants. It's that the development of the piece. Sorry, I'm just getting my words right here. The development that's been done over that 3 months, for example, right, can lead somewhere that seems to be right. But once you turn the camera on it and you look at it back, it's actually, it doesn't work on camera. Sometimes it's too what's the word I'm looking for? Grotesque, perhaps. The same thing happened to Daniel Day-Lewis when he was doing There Will Be Blood. He developed the character and they started filming, and he never looks back at the dailies. He never looks back at the rushes. And Paul Thomas Anderson asked him to have a look back after the first day or two of filming. And he said, look, I'm not going to do that. I don't do that. And he said, I think you need to see this, you know, and they looked at it back and he went, oh, right. You know, he realized that what he had created was actually just too big for the camera. That's the wrong word. That's not his word. It was not right for the camera. You know.
Do you mean like he's hitting the nail on the head a bit too much?
Yeah, maybe. It's a hard thing to kind of nail down. See, again, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. And I had this discussion quite a bit with Mirren at one point about what the audience, oh God, I've got to get my words right here. What the audience will be interested in seeing, what the audience will want to see, what the audience will follow. Okay, so sometimes the performance can be such. I'll just keep using the word grotesque for the want of a better word. Can be so grotesque that we actually don't want to follow that character, right? So we talk about this, you know, the graph that I sent you all, and that we've talked about a lot. If in that establishment of the scene or the film or whatever it is, or the play, if the audience don't fall in love with that character, and I don't mean in the romantic sense necessarily, sometimes yes, but usually not. If the audience don't want to follow what happens to that character and don't want that character to succeed, then it kind of then it will push them away early, and then a lot of people will go home, and it will not work as a film. All right. And that applies to a villain as much as it does to a protagonist, and it applies to an antagonist as much as a protagonist. So the antagonist, we want to see how far that antagonist will go. You know, we want to see what the limits are. We want to see that thing that's interesting. You know, that thing like in the Joker, for example, where he has the utter confidence to just not give a shit about the consequences of anything. He's not afraid of dying. He's not afraid of jail. He's not afraid of law. He's not even afraid of Batman. He's afraid of nothing. And like that turns us on as an audience, because we all want to be that. Not necessarily, you know, reckon the whole town, but we would all love to have that utter fearlessness, and we don't. So we watch that. And what's interesting about Joaquin Phoenix's, which is of course a completely different movie and a completely different narrative about the Joker, is we see a character go through the process of becoming fearless, which is really, really interesting. We don't see that in Heath's. Heath starts fearless, and then we see what happens to him. But Joaquin Phoenix is about a guy who is utterly fearful and becomes fearless. We have that moment where he switches off his empathy, which is the fascination of it, you know. So I don't want to go too far into examples, but the important point there that Joseph, you know, brings up is that it comes down to what's going to work for the audience as much as anybody else. You know, Terry McMahon, you probably have heard of Terry McMahon, the Irish director. A lot of you guys will know him. A lot of you guys have met him. He made a movie before he made Patrick's Day, which won all the awards. He made a movie called Charlie Casanova, which is far less well known. And it was an utter failure and an utter flop. And the reason why it was an utter flop, Emmett Scanlon played the lead role. In that film, that the character is utterly unlikable from the beginning. I mean, in every sense. I went to the movies to see it. I saw it in the cinema. There were 6 people in the cinema, and when the movie finished, I was the only one there. You know, and most people walked out around about a third of the way, or maybe a quarter of the way, when they realized this guy is not going to get any better. You know, and he's not going to progress. You know, and that's why it didn't work. But Terry stuck to his guns. He wanted to make a movie about this particular, you know, sociopath. But structurally, as a movie, it just doesn't work. You know, it's as simple as that. He still got nominated for an IFTA for it. I don't know how that happened, but yeah. He sat in the audience with them at Scanlon going, what are we doing here? You know, he kind of deliberately made a piece of shit, you know.
Very good.
Yeah, he didn't have any money anyway, so he just like, oh, whatever. So yeah, sorry to digress again, but yeah, that you understand what I mean by that kind of trajectory then, right? So yeah, and this is a question that sometimes actors come to me and they say, well, I'm going for auditions, but I'm not getting the role. You know, I'm not actually booking the role. A lot of the time it's to do with that. And it's not something that, well, it is something that can be taught. I can teach it, but it's a hard lesson to teach, because sometimes it means an actor has to actually look at themselves and what they want to express when they're acting, and actually kind of come to an understanding that it's just not going to work for an audience, and they're going to have to change that. And that's a kind of a personal thing that makes that can really hurt. You know, it can really hurt. So I mean, like, it's just one of those things, though. Does that make sense? Yeah, I can go into that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd love to know what changes they made. I'd love to know what changes they made from them first few days and what way he changed it.
Yeah.
Be interesting.
It would be interesting. I don't know. He didn't go into it in a lot of depth. He doesn't say much. You know, it was an interview. It was an interview with him and I think it was the interview with Charlie Rose. Him and Paul Thomas Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't change. They didn't go into any more depth with it. Yeah, but I can imagine you saw the film. If you've seen the film, you know how utterly over the top that character is at the end of the film, especially when he goes insane. You know.
Yeah. He's hard to like anyway, except for maybe his determination. You kind of respect him more than like him.
He's an utterly unlikable. Yeah, that's a really good point. Look, he's an utterly unlikable character, but we really want to know what happens to him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because to have someone who totally represents capitalism, a character that completely represents the greed of capitalism, is fascinating. You know. Yeah. It's a fascinating idea.
You know, it's a great representation of these men who actually paved the way for these very wealthy families we have today. There's usually a very tough guy a couple of generations back that was absolutely ruthless in making that initial money for the family, and you know, he passed that down to son, and so, but it usually goes back to some really determined, tough guy, and you know, I think he represents that just fabulously. Like,
that's right.
You know?
Yeah.
Can I ask what exactly was unlikable about the character? Was it the writing, or was it the acting tools that the actor was using to deliver, you know, what he was supposed to do that was at fault, or the writing?
It's a bit of both, Joseph, actually.
A bit of both.
Yeah, it is a bit of both. I mean, Emmett, I know Emmett, and he is a fine actor, and he's become a very good, you know, he's become quite a big Hollywood actor now. I don't know if you call him an A-list actor, but he's certainly not far off it. You know, he makes these big action films and stuff in the States. He lives in California now, I think. But yeah, I mean, he is a good actor. It's not that he's not a good actor. It's almost like the writing and the director who wrote it and him kind of got together and had this agreement that we're going to represent this you know, upper class, you know, Irish spoilt brat, and we're going to do it with a kind of degree of aggression. You know, the acting is, again, it's not as if it's bad. Sometimes it's inaudible because he has these long rants of, you know, that he goes through, these long rants that you can't quite understand. But it's a bit of everything that really went wrong with that, I think. The irony of it is, Joseph, I love it. I actually love it because I can kind of, I can sort of forgive the structural imperfection of it. You know, I can see what they were trying to do on a budget of practically nothing. You know, yeah.
I think the important thing of all of this is the journey of the audience, and it keeps coming back with everything that you're referring to is putting the audience at, you know, as part of every aspect of it. Like the last film that before lockdown I went to see was Parasite. I remember coming out the other side of the movie, sitting there, oh my God, I haven't felt that someone put their hand into my chest and dragged me on a journey like that in ages. And that's what I want. And that's why I find theatre boring. I'm not brought on those journeys. And it was the same with Joker previous to that. And for everything, your endowment, your extended imagery, it's all it's all thinking about the audience. And I just, for me, that's the biggest gift of this work with you, David, is understanding that, because I hadn't gotten that really to that degree. And it kind of takes pressure off you as well. It's not about you being indulgent and trying to work stuff out so that you understand the character. It's all me, and my person, my character, my partner over here. It's so much bigger than that. So it almost gives me anyway, kind of a permission to play even more, because it's well, we're all in this to have fun, to be brought on a journey. So it's great. It's a great insight, you know, it's really great freeing insight. So
well, that's lovely. Great. Brilliant. I'm glad that is a liberating feeling for you. You know, that, I mean, I always had this kind of mantra that acting is about the character number one, the other actor in the scene number two, the audience number three, and all of those are equal, right? And the actor comes a very distant fourth, right? People have probably heard me say that in class quite a lot, and it's actually true. It's just the kind of the way that we see people, you know, walking on red carpets and getting golden trophies. We seem to think that it's all about the actor, but in fact, the process is quite the opposite, you know. But yeah, I'm glad that that's a nice feeling for you, and it is liberating, you know, because it's an act. I think acting is an act of service, you know. Yeah. And yet, and also just, you know, going back to, on that exact same point, but going back to what Terry did with Charlie Casanova. I mean, Terry McMahon doesn't make mistakes. I mean, he knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew exactly what he was going to do to his audience as well. He was going to make them walk out of the cinema. You know, there's no mistakes. There's no accidents. He wanted to throw that right in the face of the Irish public, and did it in the most ruthless way. Maybe it will be better understood later. I don't know, but yeah. So there is always the thought of the audience, of course, you know. Yeah. But yeah, I think though that, you know, I think you can kind of, I accidentally kind of get caught up in the idea of it being about me and me expressing myself in some way or other. And it kind of is that as well, of course, because you're an artist, so you are doing that. So there's nothing, you know, wrong about that. You know, there's no reason to think that that's a kind of a sort of a self-indulgence, unless it goes sort of too far, you know. But you're just keeping an eye on the prize. We're telling a story, you know. And if you're telling a story, then you're telling a story to somebody. Yeah. Okay, great. Any other points or questions on that stuff? Great. So, you're right there, Mirren? Mirren's having profound realizations, which is great. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so we've kind of got to the we've almost kind of segued into where we want to be anyway, which is to do with idiosyncratic transformation, because we've been talking about a bunch of performances that do and have required idiosyncratic transformation into character. So what that means for those who haven't worked with me before is where we actually change ourselves physically to play a role, right? So the Wednesday workshop, guys, don't panic too much about this. You're not expected to know any of this just yet. I'm just going to talk about it, and then in class we will get into it in the nitty-gritty detail of exercises and things in the studio, right? But we talked about the concept of an archetype a little bit, where, you know, more than likely in the business, in the industry, you're going to be called on to play a part that's very like you in a lot of ways. So it'll be the same gender, the same age, all of these kinds of, you know, things that will fit your archetype. So, you know, when you start going for TV commercials as you get older and stuff like that, you know, you'll go for roles of, you know, guys and girls in their 20s who are single and having fun and whatever else, advertising certain things, more than likely alcohol, you know, and stuff like that. And then as you get older, then you'll be cast as a mother or father of very young children, then as a mother or father of older children, then as a mother or father of teenagers, and then you'll be a granddad, and then you'll be, you know, and that's your archetype, you know, and that's how it progresses, right? But of course, there are actors who don't do that work and who prefer to play roles that are not like themselves. Okay, so the archetype then is something that they're moving away from. So like, I mean, the best way, again, if I can just borrow Daniel Day-Lewis's words, you know, he says that he would prefer to play a character that's unlike himself because it's interesting. You know, he says in one of his interviews that the most uninteresting thing about himself is that he's a middle-class Englishman, right? So he doesn't want to play middle-class Englishman. He wants to play, you know, I don't know, a silver miner in 1906 in California. That's a more exotic and interesting life for him to explore. Or he wants to play someone with severe cerebral palsy. He's never experienced that. So it's for himself, it's an exploration of a life that isn't his. Or a boxer, you know, what does it feel like to be a boxer? Or an IRA prisoner, you know, or whatever the thing is. It's interesting and fascinating to him. So he goes down that road, you know, and plays someone who is not his own nationality, at least, and certainly things that he has not ever experienced before. You may notice that it's these kind of actors that often win Academy Awards and things like that. And there's a very good reason for that. It's because it's the hardest stuff to do, right? It's the hardest art to make. You're literally using yourself as a palette to create, or a canvas rather, to create a work of art. And that sometimes is quite painful, you know, physically, you know, demanding. It might require the gaining of a lot of weight, or the losing of a lot of weight, or twisting oneself into some kind of odd shape, you know, or whatever the case may be. And then to maintain that and to embody that. So the reason why this kind of, I thought we'd talk about this, is that Owen gave a monologue there in the Friday studio. You probably can't tell from him sitting there if you haven't met him. Owen's quite tall, right? When I say quite tall, he's very tall. And he managed to play a character where he became rather diminutive, right? He brought himself in and down, if you like, in rather than down, not to sort of, okay, I'm going to make myself short, but it was the behavior and the idiosyncrasies that he brought into that character that convinced us of this, or convinced me anyway, of this kind of more diminutive kind of creature being alive in front of me. That stuff's interesting to me, right? So what does that require? So first of all, again, for the Wednesday guys, we'll talk about this in more detail, but for the Friday studio guys, especially those ones who've done the applied art of acting, you'll know that we talk about separations, where we, instead of looking for a character that's just like us, that has a lot of what Stanislavski called modicums of truth being the way that we're similar to the character, instead, we're actually focusing our attention on how we are different to the character. And we call those things separations. Okay. We make two lists of those. We make a list of physical separations and psychological separations, not emotional separations. Okay, because emotional separations will bring you towards a generalized expression of emotion. So if you decide, oh, well, I'm a happy guy and I'm going to play a sad guy, you'll create a generalized state of emotion, which will usually be false anyway, or you know, obviously manufactured, right? So we create a list that's of physical differences and then psychological differences as well. And obviously one will often bleed into the other. So if your character is an alcoholic, obviously that's a physical thing. If you are not an alcoholic, right? Let's say you're a teetotaler. How do you then discover that, right? It's a physical ailment or addiction. It's a physical difference between you and the character. It's also obviously a psychological issue, and will become a psychological problem down the line that has to be dealt with, right? So then once we've listed out those separations, we bridge those gaps, okay? So we're saying to ourselves then, you know, what does it take to create this shape, this cerebral palsy shape, you know? What does it take to create a smaller, diminutive figure in front of an audience when I'm 6'9" or whatever? You know, that's got to be thought about, and it's a case of play. It's a case of studio work. It's play. I'll show you the Wednesday workshop, guys, the idiosyncratic transformation exercise. We might do a version of it in the Fridays as well if time allows, where you go through that process of creating those idiosyncrasies. So it then goes to the idea of an artistic vision, okay, where you see the character in your mind's eye. You have a vision of what you want to create, like any other artist would. If an artist is going to paint a picture of, sunflowers, what is that going to look like? Might even go and get some sunflowers and set it up and have a good look at it and decide what to do. But it's usually up here. It's an artistic image or artistic vision of the character that you want to create. And then what we do in our work is we treat the character as if it's a real human being. And that's the important point there, that this character is someone who actually could potentially exist in the world. All right. So, some schools of thought will say, like David Mamet would say, there's no such thing as the character. It's just words on a page, And so to bring it to life, all you do is open your mouth and speak, right? And that's okay too. That's a fine way of looking at it. In our work, we imagine that, when we're in the studio, the Applied Art of Acting guys will remember this. We imagine that, the character is literally walking in the door, taking a chair off the stack of chairs, putting it down on the floor and sitting down with us in the room. And what does that person look like? How does that character move from one place to another? How does that character sit? How does that character move its hands, and what's its hands and legs and feet and hips and everything? What are its habits or its idiosyncrasies? Yeah.
So it's body. Sorry, it's body language really that communicate.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yep. And that body language then gives a sense of the essence of the character in a more sensory way. So I'm sure people who are quite high tempo rhythm, what we call tempo rhythm. It's a Stanislavskian term, tempo rhythm, high tempo rhythm or high energy, high paced. And that can affect us, obviously. When you have someone like that in front of you, it will affect you. So we get a sensory sort of feeling of that in front of us. That depends on us largely as well, obviously. But the physical self, I suppose the best way to put it is how we move our bodies affects the way we feel, and how we feel directly affects the way we move our body. Yeah. I mean, again, if you're desperately tired or hungover or something like that, or sick, it'll affect the way you move your body. If you're sad, it will affect the way you move your body as opposed to the way you would move it when you're overjoyed. Just using extreme examples as well.
David, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
And just from my own experience, just to do with idiosyncratic work and voice, where does voice sit into this transformation, and how important is it?
Same thing, Luke. Yeah, great question. But it is the same thing, because when people are hearing us now talking, right, the quality of your voice, the tone of your voice is completely different to mine. Okay. So yours is a slightly higher pitch. I think you have an Irish accent. I have an Australian one. We obviously have very unique voices, and every single person on this Zoom call has a unique vocal quality. And therefore, using the same kind of extension of this theory, so then will your character. It's not, I don't think it's overly, again, it depends on the character. So if you have someone like, when Daniel Day-Lewis played Lincoln, I think we talked about this before, that, there is evidence to suggest that Lincoln had a very high pitched voice for a man of his size. He was very tall. He was a very big man, and he had an unusually high pitched voice. And so, even though there's no recording that he could kind of pit that against, he created a higher pitched voice than his own. And once again, it's a matter of, you can't just put that on like a piece of masking tape on the surface. You've got to practice that until it becomes subconscious, until it becomes something that you don't have to think about while you're acting. You don't have to maintain it while you're actually acting. And that's why, again, Daniel Day-Lewis famously will, stay in character and work in character for months on end so that it becomes subconscious. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Vocal is very much a part of it. I think you probably, I think everyone's probably aware of, when Heath Ledger was actually creating his version of the Joker, that's where he started, was his voice. And once he got the voice right, everything else tended to follow. So he was playing around with it at home with his, I think his flatmate, his housemate, before, when he was going for the audition for it, and he was mucking around with his voice, and his housemate just went, man, that is freaky. That's embodied. It's not something that it seems that you're putting on. You're not putting on a funny voice. It's actually there. It feels like it was him. And then once he created the voice, that languid, fluid body tended to kind of follow artistically from the decision about the vocals. Yeah. Yeah, great question, but absolutely true. And I think you'll find that with a lot of idiosyncratic work that's done by actors as well. Not all. I mean, you can sort of use your own voice and still have a physical transformation into character. They don't have to both go together, but often they do, But I think the important thing is that it comes from this artistic vision, that you actually have the artistic, not in any kind of ethereal or magical sense, but you have that idea in your mind's eye of what you want to create. You can see it, right? Even if you're not sure what it's going to eventually look like, because sometimes it does, like any work of art, sometimes it then ends up looking different to what you sort of expected it to be, when you started. Because during the process it starts to kind of create itself. Like you probably heard writers and stuff say that about, they started a novel thinking it would be one thing and it ended up being something entirely different. I was listening to David Foster Wallace talking about Infinite Jest, his great novel Infinite Jest, and he said, I started out I wanted to create something really sad. I wanted to create a really sad novel about America and the way America has become. And it ends up being this outrageous comedy that's now considered one of the great American novels of all time,
What's it called, David? What's the name of that?
Infinite Jest.
Infinite Jest, okay.
Infinite Jest, yeah. If you're looking for a good book to read, it's a...
Yeah, I am.
Oh, well, there you go. It's an absolute cracker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I didn't really know who David Foster Wallace was until during lockdown, actually, and I just started kind of getting into his work, and now he's sort of pushed his way into being my favorite writer of the last 20 years. Unfortunately, he like all the greats, I think, we lost him in 2008. He committed suicide, but he wrote some really good stuff, and his interviews, there's loads of interviews with him on YouTube as well that you can watch that are just fascinating. He's just so easy to listen to, and such a beautiful speaker, and such an incredible intellect, and such a fascinating guy as well. Like, he was almost a pro tennis player, and he's also like a genius mathematician. It's almost like he had just too many talents to know what to do with himself, But anyway, we digress. But there's this idea of the artistic vision then, and this really comes down to the actor. It really comes down to each individual actor deciding what kind of actor they want to be, and you don't have to be one thing or another, I suppose. But I do encourage my actors to try this side of the work. Because if you can break into that world where people are asking you to play roles that are not your type, it gives you obviously a lot wider, a wider choice of projects that you can play with. Doggies, working. Okay, sorry. Sorry about that.
Has one of them saw his lunch yet?
Yeah. No, it's just some people at the door. We've got, my son's got his mate over, and his mate's mum's just come to pick him up, so there might be a bit of noise for a few minutes. So where was I with that? Oh, sorry, I got distracted there.
You were talking about the type of actor you want to be.
Yes,
what
exactly,
you choose to be.
That's right. Yeah.
But when you see so much work out there, that I come away from watching a lot of new Irish stuff. Unfortunately, I come away feeling like, oh man, that's such a pity. That's such a missed opportunity to showcase your talent or whatever else so many times on television. And I wonder, is it that sometimes we might think that, oh, you were talking about going for this kind of work, actually, the stuff that's opposite from you, you know, but I wonder, is that's what's happening, that we're all being almost typecast? Oh, sure, just play yourself. You walk into the audition room, oh yeah, she'll be that, she'll be a Kate, or she'll be a mom, or and there's the lacking the opportunities then, because it's just all so terribly boring, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I wonder, is that just what's going on, that we don't have that opportunity to kind of jump into that other stuff? Like, I would love to play a coked up hooker, but I'm a 43-year-old mom. I've never been asked to that. I don't have the boots for it. But there's a bit of me that would love to play that. Like,
Yeah,
you know, just, but like, I may write that script, but then, you know, I don't know. It's just an odd one, because like I remember doing this, involving this photographic experiment thing, and actors, photographing these actors, and I look like a horse. I was so distraught. My whole face was just so ugly, and I was all over the place. And people were laughing at it after, going, "Oh, wearing," and I said, "Well, you know what? Nobody wins an Oscar looking beautiful. They just don't. They just don't." So I'm on this path, but it's hard to find those parts, you know.
Yeah.
So you made me think about my monologue choices now. I might just go a bit north.
Well, this is the opportunity to do it. You know, this is what the studio is all about, you know, and you've got a couple of pieces that you're working on or whatever. So absolutely take one of them. The monologue's a good one to play with, you know, and actually make some choices along these lines. You know, take the time to just go for a walk or meditate on the idea of an artistic vision of a character that's not you, and then go and find a costume for that character, go and find their idiosyncratic pattern and the way they move and the way they pick things up and put things down and move through the world, you know, and play with all of that. I think that it's a great opportunity to do that and see where it goes, you know. I suppose just going back to the industry and why, just what you started with there with the industry stuff. Yes, it's kind of a bit like that, isn't it? I think that what that comes down to is it's almost like the great idiosyncratic transformational actor is something that's not a part of the industry. It's something that's kind of separate from it, and that you have to be kind of lucky to get the opportunity to prove that on a public space. And I think,
David,
sorry, yeah.
Sorry. Would you agree that before you move away from like your archetypes or your casting type, you'd have to kind of master your own casting type first? Because I've heard that a lot going around. So, like, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think probably that's a fair thing to say. I just don't think it's particularly difficult to master your own type because it's you already. Like, I don't think there's a lot of, I mean, apart from a bit of practice playing roles that are, you know, your age, your type, your ethnicity, your gender, whatever else. But after that, it's more a case of finding characters that in order to tell the story, more effectively, you need to change. If that makes sense. Like, you do need to actually alter something about yourself. You need to bridge some separation or other in order to tell that story better. Yeah, but yeah, I think it comes down to, as David's jumped out there, it comes down to as well, sort of I think we need to, just going on what Miran said there, I think we need to accept that it's very hard to become that kind of actor in the business, because they're not going to look for it straight away. It comes down to casting directors and stuff like that as well. Like, there's very few casting directors who will go away from type because they want to get the kind of pat on the head of having cast it well, you know. So we got a guy who's just like that guy in the script. That guy already has the I don't know what's the kind of the essence of being gentle. Like, the actor themselves has the essence of being gentle, so we'll give them the part of that gentle character, and that's and then they kind of get applauded for that. Oh, that was well cast. You know what I mean? When an actor with any kind of chops should be able to actually find that gentleness, you know.
But the thing is, with all of this stuff now, I think that well, we don't have to necessarily go for the big Daniel Day stuff in our ordinary castings.
Mm.
But there's so much more. If you separate it, go back to the start of this session, separating it all into the beats, that there is a world of possibility. And if we really want to be creative artists, we can just take those small beats and put all that work into it.
Mm.
And we're practicing that big stuff, but in a subtle, small way, so that we'll be ready then. We'll be ready, guys, ready for the big ones when they come along.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. You know, and you just never know when it will. And the other thing is that sometimes, like, you know, so I keep talking about Daniel Day-Lewis. It's kind of like a broken record. But, you know, even when he started his career, you know, he wasn't really interested. I mean, he's a cabinet maker. You know, he's a master cabinet maker. That was his job. And he really wasn't interested in playing roles where he was being himself anymore, and he never was himself. And then My Left Foot came along, and of course, once everyone saw what he was capable of, then he just started getting cast away from his type, you know, over and over again, you know, because he was able to be trusted with that. So yeah, you have to kind of hope for that lucky moment where a casting director takes a risk, you know, or it's usually not a casting director, it's a director. You know, a director will come along and say, well, look, I need somebody that has these skills. So again, yes, I think it's part of our work to have those skills, to develop those skills, that we can create different things, and we can create them in subtle ways. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, a character with cerebral palsy, or it doesn't have to be something that's wildly different from us just to practice it. You know, if you feel that you are if you leap quickly to anger, find a character that doesn't. You know, find a character that gets kind of knocked around and abused by the world and doesn't get angry, and then feel what it's like to create that and to be that. Then you're shifting away from the way you would react to something. Like even again, just to talk about my student briefly from this morning, she was playing the part of the prostitute in the Unforgiven scene with Clint Eastwood. I think a lot of you would have done it in the Applied Art of Acting. It's from the movie Unforgiven. And I said to her, I just want you to play this through who you are, right? And if you don't know the scene, he accidentally kind of insults her because she has cuts on her face from being slashed up by this cowboy. And she just got really angry, you know, when my character said to her, you know, because he's been beaten up, and he says, I guess I must look a lot like you now, huh? And she just went, no, you look nothing like me, mister. You know, and she got really, you could just see the anger, well, through the lines, of course, coming out through her. But of course, that's the way that she would react. You know, if I had said to her, you know, Lisa, you're not a very good looking woman. You know what I mean? Like she would have looked right back at me and just gone, well, fuck you, mate. You know, and that would be the end of it. But that's not this character. That's not how she responds, right? So then we went back then and we created these character traits, right? And I asked her to embody these character traits where instead of leaping to anger, she is hurt by it, and continues to, you know, to look after him or whatever it is her objective is, without showing him at least that she's angry. But in fact, without even being angry, more just realizing that, yeah, my life has changed now that I've been disfigured. Yeah, and she was able to then do that. That to me, in its own way, in a small way, is actually idiosyncratic transformation. You know, because you are bridging a gap. You know, you're bridging the gap of how would I respond to this situation to how does my character respond to this situation. And again, you know, because I'm you know, praising her a little bit, you know, today because she deserves it. But you know, she was able to do that and embody that. So it wasn't just something that was demonstrated on the surface. It was something that was a palpable change in the way she felt when I delivered that line to her, you know, and what it did to her as a woman and as a person, you know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
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 So now that we've had that kind of discussion, you know, I'd encourage you with the pieces that you're working on, as always, you know, get together and rehearse, right? But I would encourage you to look at them in terms of how you are not like these people, and see if you can find your way to responding the way they would respond in the text, and maybe moving away from possibly physically, or at least psychologically, into playing it through them rather than through yourself, if I can put it that way, on a simple level. Are there any questions on that idea? No. Okay, great. Well, look, we'll finish up then. Thanks very much for all the questions as well. That it's really important. Yeah.
Sorry, David. I do have one question.
Yeah, man, sure.
Just on, I was watching Chinatown last night again, and it's one of my favorites. And I knew we'd be talking about idiosyncratic transformation, just so I was thinking up of questions possibly. And I watched a documentary afterwards about Jack Nicholson talking about the nose injury he has. It's not spoiling anything for anyone that hasn't seen it, but he gets just clipped with a knife on his inner nostril and cuts his nose, and he wears a bandage for pretty much the rest of the film. But as the film goes on, it heals a bit, and there's this, that injury changes.
Yes.
And so I wanted to talk a little bit about injury progression, a bit like Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood. He breaks his leg, and then he has that injury years later. He has a bit of a limp, or maybe he never walks the same again. But would there be anything, and if it's too late in the day, then we don't have to talk about it right now, but I just think it'd be interesting to talk about how an injury progresses and how that can influence your performance, or how you just how it develops over the course of the script and stuff like that.
It's a very specific thing, depending on what the injury is, Owen, which is why it's kind of hard to talk about it in a general way. But what you can say in a general way, actually in a specific way to what we're learning, is if you take that graph of the the rising and the falling action, right? What you can also do is create a second one, which tells you where the injury is at whatever point, and you develop that in your homework, in your preparation, so that you know exactly. Let's take Daniel Day-Lewis's leg injury. So it's fresh at the very beginning, from where it happens. Then it's 10 years later, and he still has the limp. But what's it like? Then another 10 years later, and arthritis has set in. What does that mean? Let's research that point. Then he's getting older, and the arthritis is a real problem. And back in those days, there was no real cure for arthritis. Arthritis is actually a theme that runs throughout it's kind of a sensory theme that runs throughout the movie. The priest talks about arthritis. We have this moment where he's curing an old woman's arthritis in her hands, and he's watching this moment, and he knows at that point that's happening to him, although it's never spoken. What does that mean? It's that moment where maybe his lack of faith is slightly challenged, where maybe he's thinking, jeepers, can he actually, cure that arthritis? Can he do it for my leg? Where is that? And again, you're kind of putting that through that sort of graph of the scene itself, or the movie itself. There are moments where he has to run. There are moments where he has to dig. How does that affect him? The up and down, the hard work of the job that he's doing, and you graph it out using the same up and down, rising and falling action. Yeah,
good stuff. No, I just thought it would be good for everyone to kind of hear your thoughts on it. So.
Absolutely, I would love. I've never actually had a role where I've had to do that over the course of a whole movie. I would love to do it. It'd be really scientific and fun, and a lot of research involved. But it'd be great. So look, I'll leave it there. Now, just for the Friday studio guys who are present, I know that you're not all present, but we do still have, unfortunately, the problem of this Friday being culture night, and I can only bring 5 of you in. But Miriam, you've volunteered to sit one out. Let's not make that necessary just yet, because I have asked the administration just to come back to me. I was sort of saying there that we might be able to just have a situation where 2 or 3 people are in the green room, and then some go out and rehearse for a bit in the green room and others come in. But the green room is on level 2, where the culture night thing is going to be. So I don't think that's going to wash. But we might be able to use on level 4, just that open area outside the lift. There's quite a large area there where 2 or 3 people can be quite comfortably distanced. So I'm just going to bounce that off them and just see if it's okay if we just have a couple of people go outside and do some rehearsal, and then we just swap those. swap those people over and let another couple of people go out to do a bit of rehearsal and then come back in and show us their stuff. And we can still all be present, but just not necessarily all in the same room. Does that make sense?
Mm.
Yeah, I'm very clever at working around these conditions. And I'm just trying to.
That'll serve you well in the future, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not going to go away anytime soon. But yeah, it's all kind of a matter of how you interpret rules, you know, which is, and I don't want to be one of those guys who interpret it so that I can get away with sticking a whole bunch of people in the same room. It's not that. It's just interpreting it so we can still be social distanced and still be careful and everything else, but still not have to make anyone stay home.
What if you serve food, David? Then we can all be in there, probably a meter apart, you know, without masks on. You know, think about that.
I say if we all bring our golf clubs, we can do whatever we want.
Yeah, exactly. It's so unfortunate that you have to think of such inventive ways to get us in the room, where if we all booked a restaurant to go for a meal, we could probably just do it in seconds.
Exactly. I know, it's crazy.
It's just so frustrating.
Yeah. And all I'm trying to do is make a living, and all you're going to do is learn something about making a living.
Yeah.
Learn how to.
Yeah.
Because I'll let you go anyway, and I'll let you know how that goes. I'll probably should have an answer on Tuesday or Wednesday anyway. But yeah, I just don't want to make a firm decision on it just yet if I can avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys. I will talk to you on Wednesday and Friday. Don't forget to do some rehearsal, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you later.
Take care.
Thanks,
Thanks, Dave. See you now.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.